Chapter 8. Canterbury Prison. When my brother appeared at the Kent Quarter Sessions, I pleaded guilty to the charges of malicious wounding and carrying the firearm without a licence, and my brother pleaded not guilty on all counts. I was sentenced to Borstal training, which meant I could do any time between 6 months and 2 years, and that would depend to some degree on my behaviour. My brother was detained in custody until he appeared in court a month later, during which time we were both detained in Canterbury Prison. Our time in Canterbury Prison was in one sense a time of continuous fun and just another of our good times together, even though I had just received an awful sentence. Our time in Canterbury came to an end, and when my brother was found guilty and was sentenced to 2 years in prison at the Kent Crown Court, I was a witness at his trial and detained in the cells below the courtroom. When my brother was brought below, handcuffed to the police officer, I was shocked and disappointed when I found out he'd been found guilty. In fact, all our plans had come to nothing, and I was to do a stretch in Borstal. He was found guilty of malicious wounding as well, and sentenced to 2 years in prison. On that occasion, my mother was not allowed to see us after the court, so we were taken from the cells in Kent back to Canterbury Prison that dark night. As we approached the prison gate, we saw my mum in tears in her eyes outside the prison gate. We both waved and motioned to the prison officer to say she'd come to see us, and his reaction was, "So what? She can't see you because you're now prisoners. She had not got a visiting permit." She had travelled from Kent to Canterbury late that night in pouring rain and tried to see us, but she was rejected. From that time we hated that prison officer called Titmouse. He was about 6 foot 7 inches tall. We began to feel from time to time all screws were bastards. My brother, weeks later, after we were separated, laid into that screw because of the hatred that had been bred in us by this screw. Michael head-butted him, knocked him to the ground. Michael came back as the ace of spades and was, of course, on Governor's report and put in solitary confinement. This I heard through the grapevine when I was at Wormwood Scrubs, awaiting my allocation to Dover Borstal. Upon arriving at Canterbury Prison, we were placed in the reception hall. Here we were with other newly sentenced young persons, and being with my brother made it that much easier for me. It gave me confidence because he had been to Rochester Borstal and Detention Centre on 2 occasions before, and he knew the ropes. Canterbury Prison, this housed convicted prisoners and those on remand, and these were persons who were typical of the criminal population in England at that time. In this prison we shared our experiences with each other, with others who had been sentenced there 4 and 6 months, and many had already been in approved school, detention centres, Borstal before. Some were on the 2nd or even 3rd visit to prison. There was an element of excitement and curiosity about what made people like they were. In the reception hall we were issued with prison clothing. Our fingerprints were taken and photographed, and we were each given a number. After this, the medical officer, all prison officers were called screws, had inspected us, and we were taken to our cells, called a Peter. At that time we were 3s up, my brother and I, and a lad from Liverpool. In this cell we were to remain for a few days until we were issued work. The cell was approximately 12 foot by 9 foot and housed a bunk bed and a single bed, a chair, a table, water jug and a urinal pot. At 6:30 in the morning our sleep was broken with a bang on the door with the words shouting, "Slop out!" This meant we had to get up and make our bed and empty the urinal pot. We then would go and get some hot water for a wash in a jug, for a shave, and return to our cell. A razor blade was issued and collected after, and then we were banged up until breakfast. At breakfast time we were unlocked and had to line up in a single line to collect our food. This was served up on a specially shaped metal tray which was recessed in 3 places to retain the food. A typical breakfast would be a scoop of porridge, 4 slices of bread, a knob of margarine, a sausage or piece of bacon with beans, and a large mug of tea. The bread I dipped into the porridge, and became one of my favourite meals, but on one occasion This practice of mine, dipping bread into my porridge, offended one inmate when I was in Dover Borstal. He expressed he thought what I was doing was a disgusting habit. I just ignored him with contempt. One of the ways we passed time, when locked up in the Peter, was to play blind man's buff. One of us would be the blind man, while the other two crept around and hid from the other. While the blind man tried to catch the others, there were all sorts of places to hide in such a small cell. We enjoyed this game. We jumped from bed to bed, which made the game that much more fun. During this time I found time-killing boring, so I tried to read one or two books. The books I found I could read were James Bond, as these were the only level of reading I could do, the Dandy and the Beano comics. Any other reading was just too difficult for me, as I was virtually illiterate. Initially, Michael and I were in the same cell with the lad from Liverpool, but then we were transferred to different cells. I was transferred to a cell with two other people, while Michael into a cell on his own. He hated being on his own, so we agreed that I could swap places with him sometime, so he didn't have to spend too much time on his own. I didn't mind a solitary cell. In the cell that I was transferred to, there were two other older prisoners, and one of them had mercilessly tormented the previous inmate that had shared the cell with them. He had, in fact, tied him up, put his feet in a wash bowl, and set light to him. He was transferred out of that cell for his own safety. I was transferred into this cell. I had to save myself from such bullying, and this is how it occurred. On one occasion, when the evening tea was being served, I had to retaliate to a threat. This response to the threat helped prevent me from being bullied. What happened was that the inmate whose job it was to serve tea came with one of the screws to our cell and poured the tea into my cup. Everyone in the prison knew who this prisoner was. He was a fairground boxing champion and had a reputation that ensured that no one messed with him. Men would enter the boxing ring at the fair and try to win a few rounds with the champion in order to win money. This man was the fairground champion. Well, on this occasion, he either deliberately or accidentally spilt the tea as he poured it into my cup. So I simply said, "Oh, sorry." He, in retaliation, looked at me fiercely and said, "Watch out." Well, I was feeling a bit low, and this response was unacceptable to me, so I turned on him and said to him, "You better watch out, as I'm not prepared to put up with that kind of talk." He just looked at me, gone out. I don't think anyone had ever spoken to him like that before. Well, that stopped any further intimidation, and I was able to survive by my wits. On the days we were not working, each morning and afternoon was exercise. This was where all the inmates walked in a body around the prison yard. No doubt each prisoner looked at the high walls and every building, looking for a possible way to escape. During this time we could talk with whom we pleased. Those that attempted to make an escape and caught were made to wear yellow patches, so they could be spotted easily. These times became a time of communication and formed the prison grapevine. On one occasion, I decided to change my hairstyle. So during the wash period, when we were issued razor blades, my brother removed the safety edge from the government-issue Gillette safety razor and was able to shave my head. It was much easier to wash in the mornings with no hair and much faster. However, I had gone against the prison rules and was put on a governor's report and put in solitary confinement for a period of time. At the mealtime, it caused an amusing stir, and I was to get laughed at when one of the cooks slapped a handful of strawberry jam on my head. After this, when my hair grew a little, I was able to razor a parting in my hair, which was really the beginning of the hair fashions for the skinhead. I couldn't help but notice the various characters, and the first points of conversation were, "What sentence have you got, and what were your crimes?" After this, an inquiry would be made as to your present convictions and prison sentencing. After a month in Canterbury Prison, I was shipped off to Wormwood Scrubs in London. which was a Borstal allocation centre. After a period of 4 weeks, it was decided I was to go to Dover Borstal, a closed Borstal called the Citadel. For the first time, I was on my own and was removed from one cell to another, having to share time with others. I didn't really enjoy this here, as I was lonely and being on my own. We were allowed to go to church on a Sunday, which I did to break the monotony. However, I remember when I was in Wormwood Scrubs, I was horrified by the fact that I saw one inmate tear a page out of the Bible to roll a cigarette. This was probably the first sense of me acknowledging an existence or fear of God. Whilst in the Scrubs, I heard news of my brother from an inmate who came from Canterbury Prison. I was told Michael had taken his revenge on one of the screws called Titmouse. It was a screw that had been unsympathetic to our mum when she travelled all that way from Kent Quarter Sessions Court to Canterbury Prison to see us that rainy night. He showed no concern for our mum. This screw was over 6 feet tall and intimidated inmates. Well, Michael was not prepared to put up with him any more, and one day he head-butted him and knocked him out. Of course, he was in solitary confinement and dealt with by the system. This was the kind of news that travelled quickly via the grapevine from prison to prison. When in Dover Borstal, I was placed in an open dormitory with 5 other lads, where I had to learn to survive. There was a 6'6" lad named T.O., who was bullied mercilessly by a 5'6" spectacled bottle job called Vince Bowker. I saw this bullying the moment I arrived, and T.O. was made to do this, to do that, and he would say, "Yes, Vince," "No, Vince," and so on, hoping to get off lightly and have an easy life. This went on for weeks, and I felt sorry for T.O. In the end, T.O. turned and lashed out at Vince Bowker in anger, and that put a stop to that kind of bullying. I was determined I was not going to let anyone bully me. I stood my own ground whenever I sensed anyone trying to bully me. I was in fact nicknamed Flash Clark, because I acted as though I owned the place, and I had all kinds of goods like cocoa, coffee, milk, sugar, and even Ovaltine, and had one of the senior green-tie Borstal inmates, who was ready for release, to make me Ovaltine in the morning. Of course, he had his fair share too, which was his reward. Scum. This is a film made about life in Borstal, featuring Ray Winston. This is a real, true-to-life story of what it was like in Borstal. On another occasion, a 6-foot bully was moved into our dormitory because he had mercilessly bullied another inmate, who in fact was a married man. He had asked for solitary confinement to get away from being bullied, so the screws decided to put this lad in with me in the dormitory. We got on well until I one morning decided to have a joke on him. I tied his bootlaces together for a joke, but he didn't see it that way. When he realised who it was that had done this, he was in a raging temper, and he threw those tied shoes at me in anger. They hit me and gave me a black eye. Then he came at me. As he came to hit me, I was quick enough to take a defensive position, and I hit him right on the jaw, and that knocked him to the ground. After that he kept out of my way, and the screws could see my black eye, but they just ignored it. I think they must have known how to deal with bullies. Electrical installation course. Whilst at Dover, I went on a 6-month training course doing electrical installations, and I worked really hard, obtaining top marks every week, and used to get rewarded by a half-ounce of tobacco for coming top of the class. I traded this with another inmate for his ration of milk each morning, and cornflakes at the weekend, and the egg on Sunday morning. We had to attend church on a Sunday, where we would march to church in whatever weather. We would have to be dressed in our best gear after Sunday morning inspection. I remember I had no sense of respect for God or anything like that. In fact, when the vicar, Reverend Wally, took us for talks before we were to leave Borstal, I can remember ridiculing him in front of all the inmates, and I thought it was a huge joke. Whilst serving time at Borstal, I was served with a summons to appear in court to answer a paternity suit. A former girlfriend was pregnant and had a child, and I presume the social services had made her declare who the father of the child was, in order to get finance, but I am not sure, as I never spoke to her about it. In fact, I do not remember knowing anything about it until I had to appear in court. The first time in court I admitted I was the father because I could have been, even though I knew she'd been with other men. At the time, I was ordered to pay maintenance out of my 3 shillings and 6pence a week, at a rate of 1 shilling and 3pence per week. I had no idea of the seriousness of bringing up children, or being a father, or any idea of taking responsibility for my actions. My mother, however, was very anxious, and after listening to the evidence given by the girl, she maintained it was not possible for me to be the father, as the timing of the events did not fit. She encouraged me to appeal, and she really fought the case for me. This I did with the aid of a solicitor. The girl had to prove I was the father of the child. When I look back, it must have been humiliating for the girl, because she had to explain when and where events took place. My defence solicitor asked where the event or events took place. With incredulity, he questioned her how could things happen and take place in a bubble car in the daytime. This, I think, on reflection, was humiliating for her. The suit was not proven, and I was released from the charge. My probation officer, Mr. Morland Hughes, asked many years later, when I became a Christian and had to appear in court over my confessions to many crimes, asked, was I the father of the child? I replied I might have been. The child was called David, and my mother says he had ginger hair. She had seen him out with his mother in Aylesbury whilst I was still in Borstal. He must be around 33 years old now. I met all kinds of lads here in Borstal. Car thieves, burglars, forgers, gamblers. None of us had any idea or reason for our existence, but were probably looking for the best in life, but never finding it. When I was released, I was determined to have a good time. I wanted the best clothes, a good car, a speedboat, a caravan, you name it. I wanted all those things and intended to obtain them by one means or other. I had learned many criminal ways and had no intention of going straight. I just had no intention of getting caught at any crime I may choose to be involved in. I was released from Borstal a year later, and it was during this time I began to get all the kinds of things through criminal activities in Aylesbury. I bought my first car for £100 when I came out of Borstal. It was a gold Mini 850cc.